Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. In this episode of Thinking in English, I'm going to introduce you to conversational English, business English, and academic English. It is incredibly important to understand the differences between each type of English, and hopefully after this episode, you will be able to decide which type is for you. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. And you definitely should look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Register. Register. Register is the style of language, grammar, and words used in a particular situation. For example, people chatting at a party will usually be talking in an informal register. Proficiency. Proficiency. Proficiency is the fact of having the skill and experience for doing something. As in, the job ad said they wanted proficiency in at least 2 languages. Repetition. Repetition. Repetition is the act of doing or saying something again. For example, his books are full of repetition. Frequency. Frequency. Frequency is the number of times something happened within a particular period, or something happens within a particular period. For example, complaints about the frequency of buses rose in the last year. To encounter. To encounter. To experience something, especially something unpleasant. For instance, when did you first encounter these difficulties? Dimension. Dimension. This is a part or feature or way of considering something. As in, his personality has several dimensions. Credibility. Credibility. Credibility is the fact that someone can be believed or trusted. For example, he complained that we had tried to undermine his credibility within the company. To interpret. To interpret. To interpret means to decide what the intended meaning of something is. For example, it's difficult to interpret these statistics without knowing how they were obtained. Complex. Complex. If something is complex, it's difficult to understand or find an answer to because of having many different parts. For example, it's a very complex issue to which there is no straightforward answer. And finally today, functional. Functional. If something is functional, it is intended to be used. For example, my furniture is functional but unattractive. In today's episode of Thinking in English, I want to introduce 3 different styles of English: conversational English, business English, and academic English. I'm sure you are all aware that English is one of the most common languages in the world, and the most common second language. And like every language, we use different styles of speaking and writing in certain situations. These different styles are known as registers. As an English student, just because you can have a fluent English conversation with a close friend or even a stranger in a bar, it doesn't mean that you will be able to pass a job interview, have a successful meeting, or take a university class. The vocabulary and grammar rules, amongst other things, can be significantly different depending on the register you use. As an English tutor and podcaster, I have often been asked to teach classes and give advice about all three types. And it is certainly important to understand what is meant by academic, business, or conversational English, because many English classes, online courses, proficiency tests, and textbooks are advertised or aimed at a certain type of English. Hopefully, after listening to this episode, you'll comprehend the meanings and differences between the three categories, and it might help you to decide what you want to study. However, if you want to be fluent in English, you can't just rely on one style for your whole life. I use conversational English when I'm talking to my friends, academic English when I'm researching at my graduate school or writing papers, and business English during meetings and job interviews. The English I use changes depending on the situation, and it will be the same for you. And moreover, there are a lot of similarities and overlaps between the three different styles. So you cannot just learn business English, for example, and forget about everything else. Learning a little or a lot about all three different styles will be incredibly useful for all of you. Conversational English. So let's start with conversational English. I'll only talk briefly about conversational English today, as I'll continue to refer back to it for comparison later in the episode. For the vast majority of people, this is the first type of English you learn, and the type that you are best at. Conversational English is the language used in everyday, ordinary situations, and it is certainly the most informal register I'll be talking about today. We use it when we are talking with and writing to family members and friends. Who should learn conversational English? Well, I think everybody should, but especially people who don't want to work or study abroad. If you want to travel, make friends, or are just starting your language learning journey, conversational English is for you. And almost every language school will teach conversation classes, and every bookstore will sell conversational textbooks. There are a few interesting features of this register of English. One such feature is the repetition of words. Conversational English uses a lot of what is known as high-frequency vocabulary. A high-frequency word is a common word that makes up the majority of a normal English conversation or text. Think of he, she, you, I, eat, but, and, have, good. These are very simple, common words that are high frequency. They are used all the time. And if you think about it, they make up the majority of English that you use. An average adult native English speaker knows between 18,000 and 20,000 words. And that is a lot. And there are 120,000 words in the Oxford Dictionary, I think. But don't worry. As a second language learner, you definitely don't need that many. In fact, if you learn the 1,000 most commonly used words, you will know 80% of the vocabulary used in fiction and conversational English, 75% of the vocabulary in newspapers, and over 70% of the words used in academic English. I'll leave a link to the list here in the blog, so go to thinkinginenglishpod to check it out. And if you learn the 2,000 most common words, as well as the 570 most common academic words, you'll be able to survive in most situations. Compared to the other two registers or types I'm going to be talking about today, the vocabulary choice is also much simpler in conversational English. Conversational English also uses a lot of slang expressions, abbreviations such as ASAP or BTW or LOL, and contractions such as don't instead of do not. Importantly, in conversational English, sentences don't always necessarily follow grammar rules. You can break the rules sometimes. I can ask you, "You're hungry?" instead of asking you, "Are you hungry?" Academic English. Let's move on to academic English. I actually use academic English considerably more than business English, as I'm a student and researcher rather than a businessman. Academic English refers to the language used at university and beyond, as well as in certain magazines, publications, journals, and documentaries. Although many people can speak conversational English, they really struggle when it comes to reading and writing at an academic level. Therefore, academic English classes and textbooks are really popular with students around the world, as they try to teach the skills and knowledge required to perform well in the courses that you will encounter at higher education. If you've never learned the academic words used in sociology, psychology, politics, biology, chemistry, engineering, it's going to be incredibly difficult to start studying those subjects. Academic language can be very formal and uses more sophisticated vocabulary and expressions. It is used in a variety of academic and professional situations. So if you are planning on studying or researching in English or in an English-speaking country, you need to learn academic English. You don't particularly need to know this, but educators divide academic English into 3 different dimensions when teaching: the linguistic dimension, the cognitive dimension, and the socio-cultural or psychological dimension. So let me give you some examples of the difference using these 3 dimensions. There are numerous linguistic features of academic English. While conversational English focuses on the everyday sounds of English, such as the difference between ship and sheep, or sheet and cheat, academic English focuses on the more complicated differences in intonation and stress, as in demography versus demographic. Phrasal verbs commonly used in conversations like find out and look for should be replaced by vocabulary including investigate, research, or seek. There is always a more sophisticated single word instead of using a phrasal verb. It is also important to use the correct vocabulary in the correct context. You ask your friend, "What's up?" but you ask your professor, "How are you doing, sir?" And academic English encourages the use of advanced transitions, including nevertheless, moreover, and once upon a time, instead of the simpler but or it was. While conversational English concentrates on the knowledge of facts, academic English uses or needs the knowledge of ideas, concepts, definitions, and stories. So, for example, in conversational English, if you're talking about the moon, for example, the fact, what color is the moon? When can you see the moon? But in academic English, you would need to be able to talk about things like gravity, moon phases, specific scientific ideas, concepts, and knowledge. Academic English is also used to interpret data, determine the credibility of a source, or to support an academic argument. It is the style that we use in formal presentations, official writing, cover letters for academic jobs, scholarship applications online or in person, or invitations to certain meetings. As the topics and subjects found in academic writing are more complex than what we write about in our day-to-day writing, academic English needs to use more advanced and low-frequency vocabulary. University professors want you to use more advanced English because of this reason. Academic English allows you to describe and comprehend more complex ideas. For example, so far this week, I have written about and had discussions on the sociology of the French sociologist Bourdieu and his ideas of habitus and field, and also about the history of migration to Japan and Japan's ideas on citizenship, jus sanguis citizenship, and migrant inclusion. If what I just said doesn't really sound like anything to you, don't worry, because I'm using academic English. Without using academic English, it would be impossible to truly express my opinions and ideas about these topics, especially as I am studying at a graduate level, so above university level, above normal academic English, moving on to the next level. However, I also talked to a friend about recent football results earlier this week, and I definitely didn't use academic English in this situation. And at university, the audience for your writing and their level is more advanced. When I'm at university, I'm talking to my professors who have written books and papers, and my classmates who have studied for many, many years. But when I'm at home, I'm talking to my parents, and I don't need to use such advanced vocabulary. Now, there's a lot more to talk about with academic English, but I don't want to bore you here. However, I will leave a link right here on the blog to a useful list of academic vocabulary. Like the conversational vocabulary, if you learn these academic terms, it will be much easier for you to write a good academic essay. Business English. The third and final register or type that I'm going to talk about today is business English. Now, this is the most requested form of English that people ask me about, and probably a form that you want to learn. However, it is also the form I know the least about. I'm not a business person, and I have spent a lot more time in university libraries compared to company boardrooms. However, I'll give you a few examples of how business English is different from academic English. Business English is a subset of English that is used by and useful for entrepreneurs, students entering the job market, and people who work in industries like law, business management, accounting, recruitment, and financial institutions. It is usually studied by non-native speakers who plan to enter business or already are in business with English-speaking countries, such as the UK or Australia, or countries that use English in business, like India or the Netherlands. Business English is often specific to a particular business sector or field, because each industry has its own sentence patterns, registers, and abbreviations. It is used in sales presentations, business reports, and financial newspapers. As I mentioned before, teachers use 3 dimensions to teach academic English. For business English, there are normally two dimensions we use: vocabulary study and functional study. Essentially, you need to study the specific vocabulary used in your industry, like banking, oil, import, export, marketing. And you also need to study the language skills needed to perform business activities, such as negotiating and giving presentations. It's not enough just to learn words or learn grammar. You need to learn how to use these in a business situation. You need to learn how to have a meeting, how to make an argument, how to sell a product. And that is all tied into business English. Business English focuses on using the English language in practical and professional settings, like the workplace, while academic English is used in universities and research institutes. However, in business English, there is more room for abbreviations, idioms, and phrasal verbs. And if you go to my blog, or this page on the blog actually, I'll link a few episodes I recorded a few months ago that introduce some business English idioms and phrasal verbs. Actually, I'll also link them in the description of the podcast as well. So here is today's final thought. In this episode of Thinking in English, I have tried to introduce 3 different types of English that you will encounter as you study. If you go to language school or buy a textbook or take an online course, you may be offered the chance to focus on conversational, business, or academic English. Conversational English is the everyday language we use in social situations. Academic language is the formal language of universities, classrooms, and research. And business English is used in the workplace and business dealings. The main differences between business English and academic English are their purposes and their places of use. Hopefully, now that I've introduced these categories, you have a clearer understanding of the differences, and now you can decide which to focus on. If you're learning English for your vacation, study conversational English. If you want to study at an American graduate school, study academic English. Or if you want to expand your business to the UK, study business English. However, remember that the most advanced students will be able to use all 3. After all, almost every successful business person or native English business person studied at university and has a social life. They grew up speaking conversational English, they studied in academic English, and now they work in business English. So you too should try to have some knowledge of all 3 types. What type of English do you want to learn? Reach out and let me know. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics or future podcast guests or any other learning format, please let us know. And please leave me a rating. We're now on Instagram. I'm sure you've already seen it, but go there, check it out. Lots of good content about vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And Instagram is a great way to contact me. It's Thinking in English Podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Also, all of the transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary list, comprehension questions, and all of the articles are there for you to read. That link is also in the description, so please check it out too. Thank you, and see you next time.